The 53-man Vikings roster is set. And to talk about it today, my friend Ben Leber is here. And Ben, we are here. 8 days away from kickoff. We got our 53-man roster. But when you look at this list, what are some takeaways that you've gotten?
Wow, man. I'm with you. It's crazy that we're only 8 days away from the first game. And, I was talking to a buddy of mine, and he's like, what's the vibe right now? It doesn't feel like football. And I said, this is why people like the preseason. There is a slow buildup, whether you want to watch the games or not, that football's in the air. It percolates, and it's just kind of floating there. And now all of a sudden we haven't had the preseason football games, and it's like, bam, opening kickoff is next Thursday. That's real big boy football. Lights are on. Anyway, I'm really excited. Obviously, a tough thing for some of these guys to go through a grueling camp, a lot of unknowns, and then get released. But, on the flip side, on the complete 180, there's a lot of young guys that are so excited that they've made the team. So my takeaways right now are there are 10 rookies that made this football team on the 53-man roster. And I know that the roster is going to get tweaked probably over the weekend and the next few days leading up to it. But I'm surprised at the 10 rookies that made it. I'm a little surprised at the safety position. There's not a lot of safeties on the roster. I'm a little surprised at Avion Collins not making the 53-man roster. But overall, not a ton of huge surprises, but definitely some intriguing ones.
You talk about the 10 rookies. 3 of those rookies are at cornerback. Of course, that was the biggest void this offseason heading into the draft. We addressed that. Harrison Hand, Jeff Gladney, Cameron Dantzler. How do you see those things playing out? How do you see things playing out right there at that cornerback spot?
Well, Dantzler, obviously, he was the talk of training camp. I mean, he made play after play after play, and it sounds like not only was he making splashy plays, but it sounds like he was learning the defense, and he was becoming a reliable asset out there, and they could trust him. And you hear coaches talk all the time about, I got to trust you. We got to put in a defense or an offense, and I have to trust that you're going to be in the right spot and you can be accountable. And so he wasn't just making splashy plays. He was also making the plays that won't show up in the stat books. He's taking the proper depth. He's getting under the right routes. He's taking away throws that the quarterback would like to take. And so he's doing all the right things. With Gladney, it was nice to get him back. I know he missed part of the early parts of training camp, made some plays. Harrison Hand is an interesting one. I really liked his skill set coming out of Temple by way of Baylor. And there's the rumor that he could be that guy that slides into the safety position. And as I alluded to earlier, with only 2 guys right now at safety, there's definitely a need for one of those guys, one of those 6 cornerbacks that they have. Maybe one of those guys has to slide back there in an emergency situation. That's going to be a big piece for me. Is hopefully we don't have to worry about depth at safety, and we get our 2 guys to never miss a snap. But what happens if one of those guys goes down? Who do you trust to step back in that free safety or strong safety position?
Earlier this offseason in our position-by-position breakdown, we discussed the defensive line and how things were shaping up there. Now that you have 11 guys at that defensive line spot, you need that depth, right? But now that you have the most depth on the roster at that position, what do you like about this final group?
Well, I like the fact that they obviously must trust the fact that Hercules Mataafa has not only put on the weight, but he put on the right weight. He's an interesting guy to me. I loved him when he was at Washington State. Definitely more of a rush guy when he came out of college and sort of undersized. He comes to the Vikings. He doesn't really find a home yet as far as what position he's going to play. And they said, we could use you more on the inside, so go put some weight on the offseason. Well, obviously, he must have did that. He must have done the right things to get his body right, to add more weight and more bulk, and hopefully didn't lose that quickness that made him so special at Washington State. James Lynch, we talked about him before. I wasn't concerned that he was going to be cut or not make the team, but now I want to see it in a game-like situation. How are they going to use him? Is he going to get a lot of snaps? Is Shamar Stephen, is he going to be the guy now at nose tackle? Can he stop the run? We have talked about throughout this whole offseason, the biggest thing for me on defense is not so much the young corners. It's can we stop the run on the inside? And we've got a bunch of inexperienced guys and guys playing out of position, and they're going to have their work cut out for them. So that whole group, I don't think there's a ton of surprises per se, but I think a lot of focus and attention, especially early on, those guys are going to have to hold up in the run game on first and second down to give our guys on the outside a chance to develop.
Out of the 10 rookies that are on this roster, there are 9 that was drafted in this draft, but there's one undrafted free agent, Dan Chisena. He was started at wide receiver, moved to corner, moved to DB, and then moved back to wide receiver, and he's on this roster. Talk about that.
I know, I should have said in sort of the initial statement about the surprises and all that is Chisena is a guy that I think only had a couple years of playing football at Penn State, more of a track guy. He has world-class vertical speed. And, the Vikings sort of take a flyer on him, bring him in. He obviously must have impressed with the way that he can play football. And because of what I just said about the lack of depth in the safety position, they asked him to move from wide receiver to safety. And then that only lasts for what seems like maybe a couple days.
Yep.
And then they move him back to wide receiver. And then all of a sudden, he makes the 53-man roster. And this is above, guys like Alexander Hollins, who has been in this system for at least a year. Courtney Davis out of Texas A&M, who I thought actually had a really good chance to make this team based on his college tape. And Dylan Mitchell, he supersedes him as well. So you've got a guy that doesn't have a lot of football experience. He's a straight line vertical player, moves positions in camp, moves back to the original position, and then steals a roster spot. I mean, I do hope it's one of those rags to riches type of stories here in the next year or two that he just continues to develop and becomes a star.
You can't make this up, man, I tell you.
No.
But moving to the offensive line, of course, Avion Collins, that was one of your big surprises. Him and Dakota Dozier was battling for that left guard spot the entire training camp. Right now, it looks prime for Dakota to have that starting left guard spot. But now that you have 4 of your 5 starters, and then you add Dakota Dozier, what does that mean for this offensive line, even with the depth behind it?
Well, when I look at the 9 offensive linemen that they kept, 5 of the guys are at the tackle position, and Ezra Cleveland, he's kind of listed as a tackle. He's probably going to be slotted more as a guard, at least for this 1 year. So now if you add him in at the guard position, you only have 4 guards. You've got Dozier and you've got Elflein as your starters right now. And congratulations to Dakota for the battle and the competition and claiming that number 1 spot. But right now it's Drew Samia and Ezra Cleveland, and that's it. And the interesting thing is that's the one position on offense that a lot of people said, you need to address that in the draft. You need to address that in free agency. That was a weak spot for this offense. And to go into the 2020 season and only have 4 guys that can play offensive guard, they better have found the right 4 guys because, there's not a lot of depth and not a lot of quality depth and certainly not a ton of experience at those guard positions.
Another talking point this offseason was replacing Stephon Diggs. You got a guy like Justin Jefferson, but the Vikings run the ball 49% of the time. You have 7 wide receiver spots. How do you see things shaking up there? Because that's a talented room right there.
Yeah, all of a sudden now we talked about a question mark and lack of depth at the wide receiver spot, and now we keep 7 guys, and you look at it and you're like, those are quality wide receivers. And yes, Chisena, you can probably push him off to the side right now. I don't think he's going to be an immediate contributor, but between Beebe, KJ Osborne, Sharp, and BC Johnson and Jefferson and Thielen, that's at least on paper to me a really good deep group of wide receivers. Now, remains to be seen if Justin Jefferson can kind of pick up the pieces and pick up that production that Stephon Diggs left. But it sounds like he flashed in camp. He looks great. He looks the part, is playing like a pro. So hopefully he can step in and be that immediate contributor. I'm a big fan of KJ Osborne. I know that he's going to be looked at most likely in the return aspect of the game early on, but I liked the way that he could separate from players in college. Remains to be seen if he can do that in the NFL. But I like his skill set as well. And they said quietly, Chad Beebe, with all of his injuries that he's had with the Vikings, is finally healthy. Mm-hmm. He's on this newfound, proud plant-based diet that he's on, and he's saying it's changing the way that he kind of approaches the game and is recovering all that stuff. Whatever it takes, he's had a really good camp too. And I think for all the fans out there, they have seen Chad Beebe's game. They understand his quick twitch and what he can do. I can't wait to see a healthy Chad Beebe on this team. You add all that stuff up with the tough possession type receiver that Tajay Sharp is, his ability to run block, like you're saying, the 49% running the football. You've got a tough, young, I think hungry group of wide receivers to prove everyone wrong.
I gotta end it with this because you played linebacker here for the Minnesota Vikings, and we all know the linebacker position is the bread and butter of this defense. But that fifth linebacker position spot, Hardy Nickerson Jr., what do you think played into effect of him being on this roster over the three rookies that were competing with him for that fifth spot?
Well, I do think just a little bit more NFL experience, and that's what it's going to take. And you look at the defense overall, and there's a lot of rookies. There's 6 rookies on defense that made the 53-man roster. And so you've got youth, you've got inexperience. Troy Dye is another guy that they really, really liked. Leading tackler at Oregon for every year that he started there, and that's people can sort of look at the Pac-12 and for what it is. That Oregon defense in the last few years became a really hard-nosed, tough defense, and he was the leader of that pack, and they really liked his game, and it sounds like he made a lot of plays in camp as well. So you may not know a lot about Troy Dye, but it sounds like he's the run and hit type of linebacker that you're looking for in the modern NFL, and I feel pretty comfortable. That we don't know a ton about these guys when the lights come on, but the fact that we've got our 2 studs in there, let's cross our fingers that they stay healthy all year long. But there's some youth in there that they can kind of play with and get some experience. And so it's a thin group, but it's going to be a highly productive group.
Big weekend ahead for the Vikings. They still have 16 more guys they can sign to the practice squad, so that will be fun to see. But other than that, Ben, we were 8 days away from kickoff. I'm excited. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, man. Always good to be on with you. And football's back, baby. We're right around the corner.
Let's go.